Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all, particularly our moderator, Mr. Yetkin, and certainly former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malta, Minister Bartolo, representative of UNHCR in Ankara, in Turkey, Philippe Leclerc, and last but not least, Professor Dr. Murat Erdoğan. Today, in our 14th Diplomatic Wisdom series webinars, we shall address a very important topic under the main heading, Challenge of the New Era. It is one of the greatest challenges of the new era. That's human security in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East and North Africa, and its implications for our region, including Turkey, in terms of irregular migration, which is indeed a big risk multiplier for all of us. And we have very distinguished participants today at our webinar. And without further ado, let me pass the screen to our moderator, Mr. Yetkin. Thank you once again, and I believe that we will have a fruitful presentations and exchange of views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ceylan.
Murat Bey, tekrar açar mısınız sesinizi? Murat Bey, sesinizi tekrar açar mısınız?
Açıktı ama tamam.
Tamam, şimdi, evet.
I'm very sorry. I think unknowingly I put my microphone off. Hello again. It's an honor for me to moderate this very important debate with distinguished guests. It is one of the main problems of a new era, perhaps not very much unexpected, but because of the Syria war, mainly, it started to be a very pushing subject, very difficult subject for all countries. Turkey is on top of the list, perhaps, but not only Turkey, Before starting, can I ask everybody else other than speakers to put their microphones off in order not to cause any interference? I'd like to give the first floor to, and we're going to carry out this debate in 2 rounds. In every round, speakers will have the floor, and I particularly ask them kindly to keep every round like 7-8 minutes, and then after the second round we're going to have questions from other participants. So I'd like to give the first floor to Minister Bartolo about the challenges between Africa, Europe, Malta, Libya. It's one of the critical junctures, geographical junctures of the irregular immigration problem. So please, Mr. Bartolo, can we have your views?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'd like to share with you the words of a song I heard recently. It's a new song by the Algerian singer Souad Massi. And at one point she says this: "Draw me a sea, but not too deep, for many have tried to cross and drowned." Obviously, Souad Massi, coming from Algeria, knows that there are Algerians, there are other people who have tried to cross the Mediterranean and drowned. This year, we know that at least more than 1,800 have drowned, and probably more, because when we talk about statistics in this area, we're always guessing more than giving exact statistics. I must say, I can share with you something which has troubled me a lot. I've been in politics for a very, very long time. minister, parliament 30 years, minister 1/3 of them. And the most difficult times in my life, and there I have had to face moral dilemmas, but I think that the biggest and deepest and most painful moral dilemmas I faced was when I was Foreign Affairs Minister and obviously had to deal also with this issue of irregular migration. Usually when we talk of moral dilemmas, we talk about the difficulty between taking a choice between right and wrong. My feeling was that most cases in this area, it's a moral dilemma of the choice between wrong and wrong. And I say this because it's very painful, because what you decide or, or not decide can have a lot of effect of life and death issues, of people drowning at sea, especially in the case of Malta. The only way you can arrive in Malta, apart from those who arrive regularly on planes, usually those would be secondary movement, irregular migrants, but the only way you can arrive in Malta is through the sea. So in our case, the situation is much more difficult. Please keep in mind that we're talking about the smallest state in the European Union. We're talking about 316 square kilometers. If you want to have an idea of perspective, Ankara is 77 times larger than Malta, and Turkey is at least over 2,000 times larger than Malta. Again, just to give you a perspective, 1,000 irregular migrants arriving in Malta are the equivalent of 1 million arriving in the European Union. Now, over the last 17 years, we have saved over 24,000 immigrants, mostly crossing from Libya. Because then when it comes to Lampedusa, there's obviously Tunisia, which there the flow has increased a lot, and also Algeria, and also Morocco. We certainly do not want people to drown in the sea. At the same time, we cannot welcome all those who come to us. And in our case, it's much more difficult because the central Mediterranean route, where Malta and Lampedusa and Sicily are, is the most active part of the routes in the Mediterranean. If you look even at the statistics of those arriving so far, we've had about 114,000 arriving in Europe. 2/3 of them come through the central Mediterranean route, through the sea route. About 74,000 arrived in Italy. 314 arrived in Malta. At the same time, please keep in mind that in a study carried out by a French statistician, Heran, so it's not a Maltese source, of what happened between 2015 and 2018, given Malta's size and resources, and also in terms of population and GDP, in those 3 years, we were the country that provided most asylum in the European Union, 2,922. These were refugees fleeing from war and persecution. Now, obviously, in our case, because of our size and of our resources, we cannot take everyone that comes. But here comes the big problem, the first dilemma. The European Union members, our partners, in all these years, have taken less than 10% of those who landed in Malta, less than 10%. Obama's administration was much more generous because they took double that amount. They took over 3,000. So in our case, we were left, I would say, with no alternative than to work with the Libyan Coast Guards, because we coordinate with the Libyan Coast Guards that as much as possible, they do not allow boats to come towards Malta. Now we know that, and this is one of the painful dilemmas that I was referring to, when those people are taken back to Libya, whether we like it or not, we have to admit that we're putting them back into a vicious cycle of irregular migration. that they will try again and again and again. They will be kept in detention centers. One thing where I'm really sad that I haven't managed to make progress when I was a minister, and I tried to work with Turkey on this, to try and build confidence in Libya, with them accepting more the role of UNHCR and IOM in the running of detention centers, because it's not acceptable that people who are taken back then are treated the way they are treated. So this is a big problem. On the other hand, there is no appetite from the European Union to address this issue seriously. And unfortunately, I can give evidence for this. As I said, our other member states took less than 10%. Those who really helped us a lot were Germany and France, but the other countries mostly helped us when it was transactional. For example, the European Union is going to base a cyber center in one country. There are different candidates. They approach you and tell you, listen, if we take 20, if we take 30, will you vote for us to get that cyber center? But please, when we take them, don't say publicly, because it will create political problems for us. We had an issue of a Danish ship in the search and rescue area of Malta, having 27 people on board, and Denmark didn't want to take them. And when I met my colleague, and she told me 27 are too much, and I said, come on, if 27 are too much for Denmark, what the hell should I tell you for Malta? At the same time, we're talking about human beings. We're talking about human beings. One sad fact that we must see, and honestly, when the European Union says that by February 2024, they hope to reach an agreement on the pact of migration and asylum, I'm usually a very optimistic person, but I don't have much hope that that is going to happen. I hope that I will be proven wrong. All I want to say why it's difficult, and I'll stop on this note, is if you go back 2015, when the European Union set up the Sophia mission.
Thank you.
Just one thing. Sophia mission saved 50,000 people. Sophia mission was stopped in 2019 because the countries have not agreed on disembarkation and relocation. Then it was replaced by Irene mission. The objective was stop the arms going into Libya, but do not save one person. If you save one person, we will stop the mission. And in fact, in all this time that the Irene mission has existed, it has not saved one single boat. Thank you.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for this deep insight. And I must say, I'm not very happy to see that Turkey is not alone in being abandoned by the EU on migration issue. Now, can we please go to Mr. Erdogan to see the picture of Turkey, Syria, and the problems that we each in this part of the world. Mr. Erdogan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation, especially, and thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to give you an overview about the refugee situation in Turkey. And I'm working on both, not only the refugees in Turkey, but also the diaspora policies in European countries. And now I am in Germany as a CATS fellow, SVP CATS fellow. I'm working on also the political behavior of the Turkish diaspora. But now our topic is more problematic. I mean, the refugee issue always very problematic. The migration is a fact in the world, and then more than 300 million migrants we have in the world, and then they live mostly in developed countries and then rich countries. But if you look at the refugees, the picture has totally changed, and only 15% of the refugees can have opportunity to go to good countries or rich countries. It is the drama. I mean, the general policy of the rich countries is always for migrants, especially wealthy migrants, welcome. But for the refugees, they try to stop them, they try to externalize them, etc. We have also another issue in this framework with EU. I have a presentation, if I may, it will be maybe better. I would like to show some picture and then some graphics about the situation in Turkey, and then also some information about Turkish-EU relation in this framework, and also social cohesion. I know I have very limited time, but I will very fast, and then I will show my some slides. Okay, can I do it? I think I have to have benim galiba host olmam gerekiyor bunu yapabilmem için.
I believe the technical coordinator should give you permission to do that. Mr. Ceylan, perhaps the permission, or Mr. Önhon, you have to authorize Mr. Erdoğan for the slides.
Ömer Bey, bana şey vermeniz lazım. Host.
Tamam. Mesut Bey, bir müdahale edebilir misiniz?
I stopped my clock, Mr. Erdoğan, don't
Okay,
worry.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for your understanding. Thank you. No, these figures is really very interesting. And then I think, yes, I have the opportunity. Moment. Toplamda kaydetmenize. No, not yet. I can, if not, then I can continue without my slides. I don't know.
As you wish.
Yeah, we are trying, but I think we have a problem. So could you please continue as you are? And then if we can deal with the problem, we can, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I can continue also without my slides. The numbers of the refugees is always very important for the management, all the system. And then we have to know about that. In Turkey, we have always migrants, refugees, etc. But in 2011, I mean, the Syrian crisis, we had in Turkey altogether 58,000 refugees. Now we are talking about over 5 million refugees in Turkey. It is huge difference. And then this difference make also sense. I mean, a problem is not only cultural similarities, etc., but the management of the huge numbers is very problematic, especially if you talk about the social cohesion. We have some numbers. Minister explained the situation in Malta and then in European countries. I want to give only one very attractive numbers. The newborn babies in Turkey, Syrian babies in Turkey, last 11 years. The number of newborn babies in Turkey is now 820,000. 820,000 babies were born in Turkey. And they are also de facto heimatlos because they have no Turkish citizenship automatically. We have no system. And then they have also no contact with...
Hocam kesiyorum ama co-hostunuz, şimdi paylaşabilirsiniz.
Teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi her şey daha kolay olacak diye umut ediyorum. Umarım bu kadar beklentiye de cevap verecek bir sunum olur. Şu an görüyorsunuz diye düşünüyorum.
Evet.
Tamam. Full ekran yapıyorum bir de. Şimdi herhalde görüyorsunuz değil mi?
Evet.
Tamam, teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi bakın, it is summary of the Syrians in Turkey. There's some numbers. It will be interesting and then to understand the situation in Turkey. We gave them Syrians under temporary protection status. And then in this status, we have 3.6 million Syrians in Turkey now. But we have another categories. I mean, around 110,000 Syrians live in Turkey with residence permit. And then we gave also the citizenship. The last number was 200,000. It can be around 250,000 now. And as I said, that the Syrian babies born in Turkey is over 820. Daily born is around 270. We have also Syrian university students around 45,000. And in the Turkish public schools, we have also around 700 children in each year. It is huge numbers, but unfortunately, need is more bigger than these numbers. I mean, the school-age children is 1.2 million, but we can give an opportunity around 700,000, around 500,000 children. Unfortunately, they have no opportunity to go to school, or they have they don't want to go. Working is very important. I mean, livelihood. Around 1 million Syrian work in Turkey. It is very essential for them. They have no other opportunity. I mean, the EU sent money, but it is very limited money. And because of that, they have no opportunity to then work, and then they are working. We gave also, I mean, the Turkish government gave also the work permits for the Syrians. It's exceptional situation, but only 60,000 work officially, but the others informal sector. But informal sector is also a part of Turkish economy. We cannot forget it and then ignore it. Around 10 million Turkish citizens, they work also informally in Turkey. And forced settlement is one of the important issues if you have a huge number of the refugees. Unfortunately, the Turkish government didn't make any settlement system in Turkey. And because of that, it was the most liberal settlement system ever. The Syrians live or move to city if you wish, live them. And then till 2017-18, it was easy to go overall in Turkey and then settle them. And because of that, we have very huge differences between the cities and then also district level, also livelihood level. And then it makes also for social cohesion more difficult. I mean, the ghetto structure is unfortunately one of the reality in Turkey among the Syrians in Turkey. We have also another refugees, non-Syrian refugees in Turkey. We call them international protection holders or international protection applicants, and the number is around 300,000. And huge problem not only for Turkey but also the other European countries, irregular migration. It's also huge numbers now. Between 2004 2022. The captured irregular migrants in Turkey, 1.7 million. It is a huge number, and then it's going on, especially from our Iranian border. The people coming to Turkey, and then they try to go to pass the European country. If not, they stay in Turkey. And then the Turkish government try to stop them or push them, but it's not easy. This year, only this year, the number is over 200,000. And then they are coming mostly from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, etc. And what about the Turkish-EU relations in this framework? I'm working on migration and also the EU. I write my PhD about the Turkish-EU relationship. I am pro-Turkey-EU relations always. But this agreement, if we ask that, whether the agreement, I mean, it's 18 March 2016, bring the Turkey and then EU closer or opposite, the answer is very clearly. This agreement brings not Turkey EU closer, and then it makes a very clear then externalization policy. Externalization policy is unfortunately a very common policy, especially in these days. For example, you know very well the Rwanda agreement with UK, or the Denmark policies, or the other countries, etc. But the problem is going on. We will also publish soon a new book about the Turkish-EU relations and then 18 match deal.
Mr. Erdogan, could we please give a pause here and continue in the second round? Is it possible?
Okay. I'm stopping and 2 slides more than I will.
All right. Okay.
It is part of the Turkish-EU relations. It was the 18 match agreement, and then around 10 points. If you look at intensively, which points is now it's okay, and then which points is not I mean not realist. Financial support from EU, it was very important, very essential from EU. It's okay. I mean, it's continue. but the budget is very limited, etc. But okay, it is okay. And then second, it was a responsibility of Turkey stop the refugee flow. It's okay. But the other points, I mean, the voluntary humanitarian admission, I mean, the resettlement or visa liberalization, membership negotiations, etc. These all, unfortunately, these are not in act. And it is, of course, the EU made an externalization, and then the Turkish part made an instrumentalization. We lost a lot of time for the Turkish-EU relationship because it was a very transactional policy of the EU. And then the cost issue, that's my last figures. It is a fantasy figure. I have to say that it's not realistic, but you also know that a refugee cost in European countries, 15,000 euro minimum number is 15,000 euro per year per refugee. If you calculate the number of the Syrians in Turkey last 10 years, if they were not in Turkey but in European countries, it would cost over 450 billion euro. Of course, it's a fantasy calculation. I know that, but we are talking to the EU 3 billion, etc. But we have to also see these relations. And the new pact on EU on migration and then refugees, it is the same mentality we will see also in next future, this kind of problem. I'm stop here, sorry for my long presentation, but I will continue about the social cohesion issue next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a bit long, but it was very useful. Thank you very much. And perhaps we can kindly ask Ankara Policy Center to import this very useful chart to us later on. That would be very useful. Now, Mr. Leclerc, could you please give us a wider picture? What is going on, and was UNHCR ready for such a flood of refugees in this part of the world?
Well, thank you very much for associating UNHCR to this event. And indeed, the situation is extraordinary. First, to reply to your question, Mourad Bey, it's not only UNHCR, obviously, who should be ready to respond to the 100 million people that are forcibly displaced in this year, which is a record year, with both internally displaced increase as well as refugees increasing to a record number that we had not seen since 1950, which is the time UNHCR was created. And I remind all of you that it was initially created for a 3-year period and then renewed regularly because the refugee situation was not ending. And actually, again, it's the highest number over years. And most of the refugees, as been described, are in countries neighboring conflict. And what sadly we see is that the international community system, the United Nations system, is in a very difficult situation to basically prevent conflict, to prevent war. And the recent very vivid example of the Russian Federation war on Ukraine is an example of this, and the difficulty of the United Nations system and the collective system to find durable solutions to conflicts. They are not ending anymore as with a war, with a peace treaty enabling people to return to their countries. We still see situation of instability, not allowing a big number of people, of refugees, to return to their home countries when the situation of war has ended or of internal conflict, as we had seen before. This year, only Côte d'Ivoire has been the country in which the conditions has allowed and enabled 95% of the refugees to go back to their country because of the engagement of the political leaders of that country, which enabled peace to take place and return to take place. Most, again, of the other situations we see are linked to conflict. And Turkey is a good example of that. After 12 years of conflict in Syria and the political perspective still very bleak. More than 3.8 million, or now 650,000 are registered with temporary protection in this country. Temporary protection for 12 years. What we see in Europe is that the same rule applies. When a conflict situation emerges, like the Ukraine situation, we have seen that 4.5 million refugees are now registered in the European Union and Moldova, not to count the 500,000 entries to Turkey, many of whom have left Turkey, but still Turkey is hosting also a large number of Ukrainians. So again, what we see is that the rule is that it's the neighboring countries to a conflict which are hosting the largest refugee situations. And what is important to develop, while this number of refugees and internally displaced is increasing, are responsibility sharing mechanisms that states can count on, so that if they are confronted to a major influx, and I agree with Minister Evariste that what counts is the total population you have and the refugee population arriving, and the percentage is very important, just like Lebanon is hosting almost a quarter of its population, if you count both Palestinians and Syrians, in the economic situation that this country faces. So what is the most important to develop, and that UNHCR with many others is trying to develop, is responsibility sharing mechanisms, so that countries hosting the largest refugee populations can be assisted. Of course, it's, and this President Erdogan came to the first Global Refugee Forum, which was hosted end 2019. The next one will be in 2023. And what is important there is to ease the pressure on host countries, enhance refugee self-reliance, expand access to third country solutions, support conditions for safe and dignified return. And as you have been mentioning, responsibility shifting rather than responsibility sharing, we do not count solutions as the one proposed by the United Kingdom to shift responsibility to Rwanda, even by funding Rwanda to host asylum seekers coming from France to the UK. We do not call that responsibility sharing. This is responsibility shifting, as we have also seen Australia and other countries going in that direction. Perhaps just for the sake of time, I can stay with these initial comments on the situation we see, and this challenge of 100 million forcibly displaced persons with no solutions of return at sight for most of the situations of origin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leclerc. I didn't know, as a journalist, I didn't know that this was the worst year in the case of irregular immigration. Thank you very much. That was really very useful and varying information. Could we please take you back, Mr. Bartolo, and you have drawn a very dramatic picture regarding Malta being in population, of course, and area smaller country, but carrying a big burden. What do you see in near future, sir?
I don't have any hope that there will be a solution. Unfortunately, the debate about immigration is so polarized, is so hysterical, has nothing to do with facts, that there cannot be a rational discussion. And this has nothing to do with being of the right or of the center or of the left. Please remember also that quite a number of governments in the EU are coalition governments, and sometimes you have a small party which holds the others to ransom, blackmails them, and tells them that if they are too lax on immigration, they will make the government collapse. So I honestly, I don't see how by February 2024, what our friend from the UNHCR was saying will be agreed to within the European Union. The European Union has failed for the last 30 years. At the same time, when we know that the European Union has 6 million vacant jobs, the European Union has a demographic suicide. It is getting smaller. If you see the birth rate in the European Union, it's 0.2%. In the world, it's 1.2%. And when we discuss the inflow between Libya and Europe, obviously we have to go further south. We're talking about Africa. And in the coming years, I think the flow is going to grow. Even if you just see what the effect that climate change is having on making more land not fit for agriculture. People have to move. And as already has been said, the biggest tragedy is that if you see that you have 4 million Africans in the European Union, you have 20 million refugees in neighboring countries. So the biggest challenge, the biggest burden is being carried by equally countries with development problems. Unless there is a serious push to discuss irregular migration in a wider perspective and not see it as a threat and a security, but discuss development, discuss job creation, discuss wealth creation, discuss equal relations between the European Union and Africa. I think there is still colonialism in different ways. Africa is still seen as a primary exporter of energy, of raw material. Now it's going to be exacerbated also with, replacing the dependence of Russian gas and oil by replacing it with African gas and oil, with the hypocrisy that we tell them, do not exploit fossil fuels for yourself. You go for solar energy, go for wind energy, eventually develop hydrogen energy, but for the time being, export the gas and oil to us because we need them. Unless there is a reset of relations. And I see that the European Union is being very, very short-sighted. Just 28 years' time, which is a very short time historically, the population of the European Union will be 500 million. In Africa, it will be 2.5 billion, mostly young, mostly children, whereas in the European Union, you have problems of people. I was there in Naples just a few weeks ago. They were telling me that more fields are being abandoned because they don't have who to work them. So instead of trying to regularize migration and organize even cyclical and circular migration, and to make sure that these people are paid decently, then we keep them out. We tell Rwanda to take care of our challenge. So this has to be done on a lot of different levels. This has to be done with resetting. We cannot discuss irregular migration as a standalone. It has to do with climate change. It has to do with unfair international economic relations. It's all this. Otherwise, we're not going to really deal with this problem. And we know, as I said, that the European Union needs people. It has been tragic. It's been nice to see several European countries that are usually so much against immigration welcome Ukrainian refugees, but we cannot have some refugees are more equal than others. If you are Ukrainian, you are welcome, and rightly so. But if you are African, we keep you out. We keep you out. So I think there's a lot of double standards. There's a lot of hypocrisy. And I think if we address migration on a lot of different levels, and we are ready to discuss it in as much as possible a rational way. If we make it part of identity politics, if we reduce irregular migration to a culture war, we're not going to save, we're not going to solve this problem. And this challenge, people moving, we're going to have more people moving. And we'd better see what we're going to do about it, because otherwise we're going to tear each other apart.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much. Really bold words, but reflecting the truth, in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Erdogan, could you please continue from where you start?
Okay. I think my slide is there. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And it was very interesting what Mr. Minister said that. We know why we have now in Turkey refugees, and then Lebanon and Jordan, also in Malta, because of the open door policy. Open door policy is very valuable. It is a responsibility for all. But if you get the people, and then if they cannot go back, why should this country, I mean neighboring countries, should take all the refugees and not they can share the other countries? I mean, if we talk about the responsibility sharing or burden sharing, why should this refugee issue and responsibility for the border countries? It is really huge drama. And then Mr. Bartolo said that very clearly. In European Union, they get yearly 2 million migrants, but need is 5 million migrants per year. And then they are looking for the migrants. It is always a very huge topic. And then last week, German minister made an announcement and said, invite all the qualified people to Germany to work. But if you talk about the refugees, everybody stopped. Nobody wants to have refugees. Migrants is easy. You can get, and then you can also use them in your economy. But if you have refugees, I can give you a number, the Syrian refugees in Turkey. The more than 35% of the Syrian refugees in Turkey, they have illiterate. They are illiterate. They had no opportunity to visit school. And then, of course, it is very hard to manage all the system. If you get migrants, you can also manage all the system. Okay, now I will say something about the social cohesion. It is very important. Thanks to UNHCR Turkey, we are doing an Syrian barometer survey. It's a series survey, and then we will also publish in next month also our new findings. We try to understand the situation in Turkey because as a migration expert, I have no doubt the Syrian refugees will stay forever in Turkey. Maybe 5%, 10% can go back or go to the third country, but the majority of them, they will stay forever in Turkey. And because of that, it is my as academics, it is my responsibility. I am trying to see the picture and then to understand the social cohesion. If we live with them together, I mean the Syrians and the Turks, how can we have a peaceful and honorable life for all? And because of that, we try to understand the feeling of Turks and then feeling of Syrians. We have a huge team for this survey. I will give you some very important figures about the issue. For the Turkish society, the Syrians were victims or who escaped persecution or war. But now, for the Turkish society, after 10 years, they see the Syrians as a dangerous people, etc., as a burden. It changed a lot, and then it makes difficult to make an policy about the refugees, integration policies. As you know, we have a very huge politicization of whole process. I mean, the refugee issue is a very important political topic in Turkey, and then it makes also pressure to all opposition parties, also the government parties. And then second, figures about the cultural similarities. If you are in Germany or in Europe, everybody said that, yeah, Turks and then Syrians, they are relatives, and then why you made that problem? But if you ask to the Turkish society, over 80% they said that we are not culturally similar. You know, I will show you also the Syrians. At the beginning of the process, the Syrians said that, yeah, we are very similar, but now they are saying also, no, we are not similar. It is a very emotional discourse. You cannot make integration policy and the realistic policy if you think about always emotionally. And then third one, the support to the Syrians, around 30–40% of the Turks, they give personal support. Is very valuable, very important, but each day it is less than before. Social distance, the Turkish society brings huge social distance to the Syrians. Syrians try to come to Turkish society, but it is also not easy because the numbers is very huge. And then this huge number give more, how can I say, worries for the Turkish society. And then the Turkish society believe that they live with support of Turkish government. It is also a wrong idea because of the wrong or lack of the communication strategy. The Syrians live in Turkey with their own effort. We should say that. And then if you ask the Turkish society what we should them, they said that we should send them back, over 80%. It is not important they are from AKP party holders or CHP, opposition, etc. It is the wish, and then it makes also huge pressure to all parties. And then it is also difficult to make in this environment integration policies. And the policies, the state's policies regarding Syrians, the huge criticism from all part of the Turkish society. If you ask to the Syrians, they worked already in Turkey, over 37%. It's very important. They work mostly daily works, and but anyway, they had also a lot effect because of the pandemic, and then it makes also very difficult their life. But for cultural similarities, one more time, if you ask the Turks, they say we are not similar. And then now you can see also the numbers here. Now the Syrians believe also no more we are relatives. It's also a part of this nature of migration issue. And then the Syrians complain about a lot, but they are very satisfied in Turkey with health services and then education. But the other issue is not easy for the Syrians. And which status they want to have in Turkey? They want to have a Turkish citizenship. But very important issue, return is, voluntary return is for them is not a realistic option. And then last point, maybe it will be also for Europe, and then Turkish-EU relations very important. Would you want to move to third country? I mean, the European countries, etc. Now it's reached very huge number, 55%. And then we ask also even the border, if the Turkish government open one more time the border or not control the Turkish-Greek border in next future, we ask them, would you like to go? It was last year only 10%, now over 35% they say yes. And then it will also huge crisis next future. As you know, we have a new pictures and a very, very traumatic pictures from Turkish-Greek borders. And then there is also another movement in Turkey, convoy of light, etc., etc. I am unfortunately very pessimistic. In next future, we will see this issue much more, and then it will be a huge crisis in Turkish-EU relations, and then Turkish-Greek relations. And then last point, our opposition parties, they have a fantasy for me. They said that if we are in the power, then we will go to Assad and then we will make an agreement, and it's very easy, then Syrian will go. Number one, the Syrians have no interest to go back with infrastructure, with the situation in Syria, etc., instability, everything. And then second, number two, the Syria is no more only for Assad's country, unfortunately. There are Kurds, there are Americans, there are Russians, there are Irans, etc., etc. And then third one, there's security zone of Turkish side. If Assad said that, okay, we are doing an agreement, then we should also let this security zone, so-called security zone. Then it is very risky because around 5 million Syrians in Syrian territory, they are waiting for an opportunity to go to Turkish side. And then I think it will be also not easy to come back, and it will also another huge problem next future. Unfortunately, I'm not too much, how can I say, optimistic for this whole issue. Once, maybe last sentence, the Turkish society give a lot of effort, and then their contribution of the whole situation is very important. But politicians in Turkey, they were always, I mean, even they are in opposition or in government, they are very emotional. And then we need realistic policies in Turkey, and then we need real burden or responsibility sharing in the world. As Philippe Leclerc said, that we have 100 million refugees in the world. Nobody wants to have them. It should be changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erdogan. Mr. Leclerc, Mr. Minister, former Minister of Malta, and Professor Erdogan, they are very pessimistic. They don't have any hope regarding the future of this immigration problem. What is your view? Are you optimistic, sir?
How can I be optimistic when I'm mentioning to you the 100 million people, and I have to specify here, I'm not talking about migrants, but refugees or forcibly displaced, meaning people who had to flee the places where they were living, either crossing a border and becoming a refugee, or in their own country and other places of displacement. But this is because of violence, violation of human rights, war. So this makes the protection required for these people as refugees, because they are not only, and of course these are severe circumstances as well, fleeing because they do not find food, or they are the consequence of climate change and mixed root reasons. So when you reach 100 million people as forcibly displaced, we cannot be optimistic at all. Because as I said in the beginning, the capacity to prevent conflict and solve durably conflict is not there. And actually, we may see a higher number, an increased number of forcibly displaced refugees and internally displaced as we see conflicts further developing. At the same time, what I would like to say, and we see it with the Ukrainian situation, as we had seen it in the beginning of the Syrian situation, most of the refugees fleeing violence, war, hope that they can return back. And initially, the Syrians in 2011 were hoping that the situation would not last and that they would go back to their country. We are seeing it, even though the conflict is different, but also similar in many ways in Ukraine, where mostly women and children have been fleeing as men are fighting against the invasion. And but at the same time, we see that most of them want to return, and this is why we have to concentrate on solutions. Today, politically, it's very difficult to talk about a solution in Syria and envisage voluntary return, because the situation in Syria has not enabled politically from a security point of view, and even from a basic economic point of view and social point of view, for people to envisage to return. No parent who would have had his children raised in Turkey would envisage in any responsible way to return to Syria in the current situation of uncertainty and expose his children and relatives to this uncertainty. And I'm not surprised at all by the results of the Syrian barometer that Professor Erdogan was showing, is that most of the Syrians who have been benefiting from the social inclusion policy of this country are not envisaging to return. But it's not only from Turkey that they are not envisaging to return. In a country like Lebanon, which is in an economic situation of crisis, we do not see many Syrians voluntarily returning. They might be pressed to return, and they might envisage more to return from Lebanon in view of the conditions that they're living in. But again, we do not see any mass movement of return for obvious reasons. You need a peaceful situation, a political situation which enables that return. Afghanistan, I'm sorry to go a bit out of the MENA, of the Middle East and North African region, but the 2 million people that possibly were trying to come from Iran to Turkey is also provoking very strong policies on the part of Turkey, which is hosting, again, more than 5 million people, and sees that it cannot afford to receive or even send any signal to Afghans to benefit from any protection in Turkey. And we see actually the government enabling return, voluntary and forceful, of more than 40,000 Afghans who are sent to the Taliban situation we know, not only the policy of the Taliban, but also the earthquake, the floods, and the non-capacity of that country to provide the basic resources to its people. So again, the most important efforts that we have to make is on the root causes, because otherwise the situation of the refugees will continue to evolve negatively. What I can just say also is that we are engaged very much with the World Bank, with the IMF, for the situation of countries who are hosting, and many of them are particularly poor, and their particular situation needs to be taken into account, and more IMF and the World Bank and other regional banks are taking this into account to support such countries in dealing, hopefully on a temporary basis, with this situation. So no, I'm not optimistic, but the mandate which has been given to our organization is forcing us to look first at protection of those who are persecuted and fleeing war, as well as to find durable solutions. And again, in the world that we see developing, finding solutions is extremely difficult. No, I am not optimistic.
That's even worse. What is? Can I ask the first question, people, to Mr. Leclerc? What is needed for you to be optimistic, sir?
As I said, first, the root causes, so the capacity to prevent conflict. And again, I'm not talking about migrants in general, but already the refugees, because of this proliferation of conflicts and non-capacity of ending durably conflict. If that does not happen, the basic difficulty is there and is growing. So I would really prioritize that element as enabling voluntary return to take place.
Thank you very much. Fatih Ceylan wants to ask a question. Please, Mr. Ceylan.
Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate the comprehensive and thought-provoking presentations made by our panelists today. So I should like to reiterate my gratitude to all three. I have two questions. Professor Erdogan stated that 35% of Syrians under temporary protection in Turkey is illiterate. What's the percentage of those people who decide to send their daughters to school? What's the schooling percentage of the girls of those families? The second question is, I'm grateful once again for the views and the picture depicted by all three panelists who have cast light on different aspects of irregular migration, its impact on adverse impacts on polities, economies, and societies at large. But my question is there any analysis that shows potential links or correlation, rather, between the rising number of refugees and irregular migration with the rise of far-right populists, authoritarian regimes in many countries? Is there such a scientific or sociological analysis that demonstrates the correlation between these two phenomena? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I believe Mr. Erdogan, Dr. Erdogan, has to answer, and then whoever wants to answer the question by Mr. Ceylan, all three, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ceylan, Ambassador Ceylan. Thank you very much. I gave these numbers especially because we have to think about that. Your question is very, very important. We didn't have any chance to choose our refugees. It is in the refugee issue, it is not possible. If you have a migrant, you can choose, but if you have a refugees, suddenly you have millions of refugees in your country, and then you cannot choose it. But if we talk about in Turkey about the education, refugees education, etc., we think about always the school-age children between 5 to 17 years old. But I want to give these numbers. For them is also very important. How their family or their fathers, mothers' education level. Unfortunately, it's a disaster. It's a fact. We cannot say that, we can also not change that. And because of that, we should also give education to the older people, not only school-age children, but also the others. Because it affects all the social economic issue in Turkey. You are right. For example, to have too much children, or the women's rights, or the daughters to send them schools, etc. It's also a part of this whole education system. We cannot ignore that, and then we see also this detail, and then we should also understand that. Why we have Syrians in Turkey, and then their education level is so low. I mean, Ambassador Önhon, he can say more. Syria was a good country. I mean, in Middle East country, education level is better, etc., if you compare to other countries. But we had two, unfortunately, bad chance. Once we get mostly from North Syrian people, and then secondly, between 2014 2016, around 800,000 Syrians left Turkey and then go to European countries, and then they were more educated than the Syrians live in Turkey. It's a drama. And what about the education issue? If you look at the numbers, unfortunately, each year we have around 500,000 children. They cannot go to school. We cannot say that because of the capacity or because of their family's decision. It is very complicated. But number two is very important. In primary school and then secondary school, the gender balance is not bad. But if you look at the lycée, I mean, I don't know, high school, then the participation to this high school is very low. And then we can see very clearly the youngs coming to school. But they have also another problem. They have to work. And then for the daughters, the families mostly doesn't want to send them to school. And for the boys, they have to work with their family and then for their lively money. And because of that, it's a very problematic issue. For last sentence about the pessimism, of course, it is not easy issue. We cannot say that it's a crisis, we can find a solution and then it will be a chance for Turkey. I didn't see any country through the refugees better condition. I know a lot of countries through the migrants, they have better condition, but not with refugees. I hope we will have a success. And about the extremist parties, populist parties, far-right parties, etc., etc. You know, in the world, these kind of parties is mostly against the migrants. We should understand always, migrants is relative easy issue than refugees. Because migrants you can plan, but for the refugees you have no understand. And then what we have in Turkey now, the government, they didn't get enough attention to the public feelings and then their worries. And because of that now, a party or people, they can be leader of their worries. It's a very typical issue. And then we have also this discourse, and then it will also bring a lot negative things to Turkish democracy and understanding for human rights in Turkey, unfortunately.
Thank you. Anybody else from speakers? Mr. Bartolo,
Yes.
Mr. Leclerc to answer?
Yes, I would like to take up some of the points that have just
Sure.
been made. First of all, I think this issue is very difficult because it's an existential issue. It's not just politics, it's not just economics, it's not just social and culture, it's existential. The people, the refugees, people who have left their country are uprooted. They have lost their comfort zone. But where they arrive, the people receiving them also lose their comfort zone. So we are talking about people who feel disoriented, both those who arrive and also those who receive them. I'm sharing Malta's experience with this. We're a very small territorial country, very small society, less than 500,000 people. People do not make a distinction between refugees or asylum seekers and migrants. In our case, we need a lot of people to come from overseas to work. They feel it's a very densely populated. We are one of the most densely populated countries in the world. So there is all this pressure. And as it's existential and people feel anxious and people are afraid, then it's very easy to have the politics of hate, to have the politics of fear. And one of the ways to win an election is to show how hard you are on refugees and on migrants. The more you want to show that you are patriotic and that you are nationalistic, the best way to do it is to talk against those who have come from outside. In Europe, this has been made worse because of the financial crisis. First, people were feeling very anxious because they were losing jobs, they were losing houses. At that time, the policy of the European Union, austerity, was saving banks and not saving people. So when the refugees started arriving, they were already anxious about their own personal situation. So with these arriving, they became even more anxious. Just another point I want to make, it might sound very controversial, but I'm going to make it because it's true. When we come to discuss the situation in Libya and even in Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa, but let's just take Libya. Who the hell made the place collapse and tore it to pieces? It's very easy for NATO and other countries to invade, bring about regime change. It's very easy to drop bombs and then leave. And in 2022, 11 years later, we're still trying to pick up the pieces. So I hope that the same thing has happened in Afghanistan, and we can make a whole list of where people have been displaced, where there is conflict, where there is war. It's very easy for the great powers to go in and think that there is a military solution. They're very good at invading and at, within inverted commas, winning the war, but then they go away and do not contribute anything to rebuilding the peace. And the same thing is happening about Libya. I mean, the most difficult situations that we have and less of responsibility sharing, these countries have a lot to answer for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before going to Ömer Önhon and Hasan Göğüş on the list, I'd like to share two comments, two remarks from participants. Alexander Karapiperis wrote, as far as there are more than 250 million people wishing to relocate in Europe, in the neighboring countries, can you consider that Europe, in parentheses, to be honest, 4 or 5 countries, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, France, UK, can accept most of them, and their decision to relocate could be a unilateral right? That's a remark. There is another remark by Hind Kabawi. Currently, some of the parents are worried to send the children because of increase of hate speech at school. Media is not working a good work stopping the hate speeches. Every Syrian I met in Turkey will love to go back to Syria, but their own home, without fear of getting executed by the Syrian regime. A very important remark. Thank you very much for the participants for their remarks. And Mr. Önhon now, please put your question.
Thank you. Well, I would like to thank all the speakers, and I have to say I agree with almost everything that they have said. I share their pessimism. I think one of the problems is that there are too many crises at any one given time, and too little financial resource to address all the crises. And my other comment would be, I'm very concerned when this immigration or refugee issue becomes a domestic policy issue, and then things start to get out of hand. I find this very concerning. My question is, there is a lack, we need an international system and a coordinator to deal with this issue, which will be with us for many years to come and in increasing numbers. The UN is, of course, doing its part in a different way. But don't you think that the UN should take the lead in a more concrete way and act like the organizer, which would address the issue? I don't know who this question goes to, but who should, I mean, what should the international system be, and how the UN could assume a more effective role, maybe? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leclerc, would you like to answer that, particularly since Mr. Önon is wondering about the international situation?
Yes, with pleasure. The UN is the reflection of what the international society is, and the more divided it is, the less the UN can also act. Not only talking about the Security Council matters with the veto, but more generally. And we see that we are more and more confronted to a divided international community, which does not allow this coordinating role that you asked the UN to take. Of course, it's trying to do it. I mentioned the Global Compact on Refugees, the Global Compact also on migration, but we cannot by ourselves, the UN, do without states' engagement. And again, with a divided society, this leading and even coordinating role is more difficult to exercise. If I may, just on the education, I think it was extremely important also, and just the politicization also of the issue of refugees. It's never a good signal, and we have witnessed this very much in the Western world, in Western Europe in particular, and we see much of these signals appearing in the Turkish society with the elections coming. And I think we have to remind ourselves that during these 12 years, the very responsible policy that has been taking place towards these 4 million people through access to education, and again, through medical coverage, through a certain access to employment, which will, if the studies would be out there, show also the positive consequence also that the presence of refugees can have. Because it can be like that, as I have seen it also for several years in Iran. That country with sanctions cannot anymore host the 2 million it used to host, but I have seen how much Afghan girls have benefited from education in the country of asylum in Iran, paradoxically, and have contributed at the time to the development also of certain regions of Iran. Right now, it's another situation. But again, I would just not say as radically as my friend Mourad Bey that refugees are systematically something negative for the country hosting them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other answers to Mr. Önon's question?
Yes.
Speakers? Yes, Mr. Bartolo.
Yes, interesting the point that Omar makes. And what is interesting is to have the famous French economist Thomas Piketty, who has written about this topic, saying that, yes, there should be an international approach, and that we should, as much as possible, try to develop rational, realistic, evidence-based, scientific policies, but with a humanist approach. I also agree that when we rubbish multilateral organizations or organizations like the UN, let's keep in mind that, as was said, these reflect what the member states allow them to do. And it reminds me of two proverbs, which I think we should keep in mind. One is the British proverb saying that a bad workman blames his tools, and these organizations are tools. And if we make a bad job, we shouldn't blame them. And there is a very strong Russian proverb which says, if you have an ugly face, don't blame the mirror. So we shouldn't blame these organizations. It's what we do. It's what we do. It's what we do with them. And I think I repeat, the great powers have a lot to do. A lot of these international organizations, like the Security Council, does not reflect today's reality anymore. You can't have only those permanent members with veto, and then we have other countries that are left out completely. When it comes to the IMF and World Bank, recently, the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, made a very good point. She said, when you expect us, small developing countries, to repay the loans that you give us, and she was addressing both the IMF and World Bank. When the British government was made to loan money after the First World War, this loan has only been redeemed recently, practically 100 years later. Germany, after the Second World War, is repaying its loan still now. But when we come to these countries, we tell them repay in 7 years, repay in 10 years. So yes, we need an overhaul of the international organizations to reflect more today's reality, but also to reflect the needs of today and not only of the great powers.
Thank you very much. And we have a similar Haiti, France situation as well. Yeah, that's tragic, really tragic. Mr. Gauche, it's your turn, and I'm afraid this is going to be the last question since we're running out of time.
Thank you, Murat Bey. I'll be very brief. First of all, I would like to join Ambassador Ceylan and Ambassador Önhon in thanking the three speakers for their very detailed and enlightening presentations. I remember a saying, the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is, pessimist is an optimist with experience. And I believe all the three speakers are very experienced in that respect. I have two questions. One to Mr. Irregular. What is the average percentage of voluntary returns according to UNHCR statistics after the conflict is over? And my second question to Professor Erdoğan, according to his surveys, what is the estimate of Syrian returnees will be once the Syrian crisis is over? If I remember well, he said the percentage this year who would like to cross over the border to Greece rose from 10% to 35%. Does that mean the other 65 wants to stay, or some of them will move also to Syria?
Yes, answers. Who wants to go first, Mr. Erdoğan, or?
I can also. If you,
yes, please do so.
Okay, yeah, I'm going on. This return issue, we are asking in all our surveys, and then with a lot of detail and then different questions. In my experience and then in my surveys, we can see no, how can I say, interest to go Syrian voluntary return. Around 70% of the Syrians, they say very openly, we don't want to go back. Last year, because of the political discussion in Turkey, and then the Syrians have also another problem because of next election in Turkey. If the government change in Turkey, all the opposition parties say we will make an agreement with Assad and then we will send them back, etc. These discussions affect also the Syrians. And then hate speech, etc. That it was also a question. I am totally agree. Unfortunately, in school, the Syrian children have a lot of problems. They cannot also easily register to the schools. If they register in the schools, they have also another problem. I don't know in English a word of the akran zorbalığı. How can I say that? I don't know in English. But
bullying.
Sorry.
Bullying, you can say.
Yeah.
peer pressure.
But the discrimination also in the schools, unfortunately, is very clear. Why? Because the need of the schools, new schools for Syrian children, at least 1,500. But we built last 10 years around 200 schools. It makes pressure to the schools administrative, and then they don't want to have extra Syrian children, etc. It is not easy. I know that, but the discrimination is also unfortunately in the schools and a case, and we cannot ignore that. For return, one more time, we became only two answers very clearly. One, we don't want to go around 70%. The second, if the war ended and then a regime is changed, and then if our wishing government come, then we can go. I see no realistic option. And because of that, we have enough experience. I think the voluntary return is a fantasy for Syrians in Turkey because the situation in Syria is also not good. You know, the Lebanon government and then Jordan, they made always a policy. They said that they should go back, and then we don't want to make any integration policies, but you can also see the numbers, nothing changed. The Syrians in Lebanon, instead of the very, very bad situation in Lebanon, they don't want to go to Syria. You can also understand that the situation in Turkey is much, much, much better. Because of that, I can say that the return is fantasy, and then we should prepare ourselves for next future, for our peaceful life. I'm saying that always integration policies is not for newcomers. Integration policies for our security, for our peaceful life, for our honorable life. And because of that, we cannot postpone that. We cannot wait their return to Syria, etc. I have to also say that. Okay, now I can stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Bartolo. Mr. Leclerc, would you like to answer, sir?
Just a few points. I agree that learning to live together is formidable, but we have no alternative. We must learn to live together. And if we learn to live together within our societies, then perhaps we are equipped better to live together among regions, among countries, and among continents. So that is number one. Number two, regarding voluntary returns. Obviously, whatever reality we're talking about is context specific. What applies for Syria, for example, wouldn't necessarily apply for other sub-Saharan countries like Somalia, like Sudan. There, if we have voluntary returns where we give people just money to go back, what we know is that they use that money to come back. That money should be part of a program where they are trained and get the skills to run businesses, so that when they go back, they bring something new to that society. So they have sustainable businesses, which helps them. And it's the only way that when they go back, they will not return. Let us keep in mind that however difficult, and even if they are living at the bottom of our societies, for them, this is an improvement compared to what they have at home, especially if they've left, not just because of war and persecution, but also because of the economic situation. Thousands are leaving Tunisia mainly because they have no jobs. So they will only go back if there is a job waiting for them in Tunisia. Last point is, yes, we are not optimistic, but we cannot afford to despair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartolo. Mr. Leclerc?
I would stay on that very important note that Minister Bartolo said. We are pessimistic, but we have to continue fighting and finding solutions. I would like to respond to say that there's a percentage of people who return, but as you have said also, Minister Bartolo, it's always context specific. But what I can say is the longer the situation remains, as in Syria, and with no progress, the likelihood of voluntary return decreases as well, including in countries like Lebanon, where the situation still is not as favorable for Syrian refugees as it is in Turkey. At the same time, I gave the example of Côte d'Ivoire, where it was extreme severe conflict, but 90% of the refugees who were in neighboring countries have returned to Côte d'Ivoire So there are, I have seen in my whole history with UNHCR of 32 years, in 2002 in Kabul, we saw 1 million people voting with their feet and returning from Iran and Pakistan. So there are conditions by which people decide to return. But again, the longer the situation remains, the smaller the proportion of people who will return.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leclerc. Mr. Leclerc, Mr. Bartolo, Mr. Erdogan, thank you very much for this great, really great and very informative debate. And thank you for a thank goes to Ankara Policy Center for making this great debate real. I made use of it as a journalist. I hope it was good for everyone. I think we have to close now. I wish you a great day for the rest of your day and hope for the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you all.
Have a nice evening. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.